Okay, let's finish with the axial skeleton. Okay, the vertebral column. Now, each vertebrae is given a name according to its location. Let's get out our new. You guys can use this colored spinal column as much as you need to. Okay. Cannot find my remote. There we go. Okay, so vertebral column or spinal column. There's 24 single vertebral bones, okay, that make up the spine, and each one is separated, like we said, by these intervertebral discs. And if you guys don't remember, that's fibrocartilage in there. Okay, we have 7 on this skeleton. We have this yellow color. We have 7 cervical vertebrae. Remember, cervical means neck, so those are the ones in the neck. We've already learned these before. We have 12 thoracic vertebrae. Okay, each one's paired up with a rib. Those are the orange ones. And then we have 5 lumbar vertebrae, which are these large red ones. And then we have the sacrum, which is actually fused. They were separated before birth, but they fused together. And then we've got the coccyx, C-O-C-C-Y-X, which is the green on this skeleton. And anyways, that is the tailbone. That's what we usually refer to as the tailbone. Okay, so those are the 5 sections of the vertebrae. Now we're going to learn a few specifics about them. So cervical is the yellow, orange, thoracic, red, lumbar, blue is sacral, and then the green is the coccyx on the one we have here in class. If you look at this, okay, so, well, this kind of shows you, but I do want to show you a couple things on here. First of all, these first 2 cervical vertebrae, well, let me keep going for a minute. Actually, we'll stay here. So if you'll look on your paper, the intervertebral disc is on here, which we already talked about. You've got your 5 sections. One thing that's not in your book that I did want to add on here is it's called the vertebral prominence, okay? And if you look on your 7th cervical vertebrae, okay, if you will put your hand kind of behind your neck, there's a big bone there that sticks out, okay? And that's called the vertebral prominence. And that's on C7. It's just the bottom part of C7, that spinous process. That one in particular just sticks out. So that's what that is. Okay, now the spine has what we call just its normal curvature. Okay, those are the primary curvatures. Now we all know our spines curve. Okay, so primary curvatures are the spinal curvatures of the thoracic and the sacral region. So these are actually the ones that we're born with. I think I covered up our picture here. Oh, that's on the next page. So anyways, these are the ones that we have when we're born. So, you know, your thoracic spine kind of curves outward, and then the sacrum also curves outward. Those are your primary curvatures. We're born with those. Secondary curvatures are actually the ones that kind of go inwards or go anterior. Our primary curvatures go posterior, anterior, the cervical. Secondary ones go interior. So that's your cervical spine and then your lumbar spine. And there's a picture of a baby on here. You can actually really tell. So that this babies are born with that primary curvature. Okay, you can see how round this baby's back is. Okay, and that's because he's got those primary curvatures, but hasn't yet developed the secondary ones, the cervical one and the lumbar. Okay, 3 abnormal curvatures of the spine, you can see in this picture. Scoliosis is where the spine is kind of S-shaped, so it actually goes like laterally changes or curves laterally. Okay, kyphosis, this is what you a lot of times see with osteoporosis, where people, it's like their vertebrae will actually kind of collapse in on each other and it curves outwards. Okay, right, usually at the thoracic spine. Lordosis is where people have like an overarching lumbar spine. So typically their lumbar spine actually curves way in. Okay, so here is a vertebrae, just one individual vertebrae up close. Okay, so, and I meant to tell you guys, those three abnormal spinal columns and the primary and secondary curvatures, you can expect to see those on the chapter test, but they will not be on the practical test that has all the pictures. Okay, anyway, so this is a typical vertebrae. Okay, you can see we've already talked about this some. We have the spinous process. That's the one that's at the back. Okay, that's the one like your vertebral prominence. That's the one you can actually feel on your back. Those stick straight backwards. The transverse processes go sideways like our transverse plane. Okay, so those are the ones that actually kind of look like wings. Then we have the vertebral foramen. And remember, a foramen is just an opening. So that's actually what the spinal cord goes through. And then we have the body. I don't think the body is on the test, but and you will not be given different vertebrae, shaped vertebrae, and you have to pick out what part of the spine that they're in. You'll just be given a general vertebrae, and you have to pick out the spinous process, the transverse process, and the vertebral foramen. Okay, so atlas and axis, these are actually the top two vertebrae. Your C1, oh, and I didn't say that, but your C1 and C2. Let me explain what those numbers are. I think we talked about at the beginning of year 2. Each section is also numbered. So, for example, your cervical vertebrae, you have C1 through C7, and it goes superior to inferior. So C1 is the atlas, C2 is the axis, and then it goes down from there. You have C3, C4, C5, C6, C7. Same idea goes along with the thoracic spine, except you have 12. So you have T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6, T7, T8, T9, T10, T11, T12. Okay, so that's how whenever you hear somebody has a fracture at a certain place, like T12, for example, that gives you an idea of which vertebrae. Same thing with lumbar. You've got L1 through L5. So just so you guys are aware of that. But the atlas and the axis are actually really specialized, two very specialized vertebrae. They're shaped a little bit different than the others. And that's because that's what actually allows neck movement. Okay, that's what allows our head to rotate and move up and down and side to side and so forth, are these very specially shaped vertebrae. So the atlas is on top, okay, and you can see the transverse processes on the side. This is C1, and then the axis is C2. Maybe you can remember if you go in alphabetical order, atlas, then axis. Okay, atlas is C1, axis is C2. One thing that's really important for you to know, and I don't have a good picture of it, is I want you guys, whenever you get a chance, I want you guys to look at the axis on here, or actually you can look at it too on the big skeleton. But there is a process, just a little part of the bone that sticks up on the axis, and it actually kind of goes up through the atlas, and what that does is it kind of provides like a little rotating bone in there to give that its ability to rotate. Now it looks like a tooth, so sometimes you see the dens. This is called the dens down here at the bottom, that little tooth looking thing is. And you'll also hear it called the odontoid process. O-D-O-N-T-O-I-D. O-D-O-N-T-O-I-D. Odontoid. And if you guys will remember, if any of you guys in principles, odonto means tooth, and oid means looks like. So that literally means it looks like a tooth, and it does. If you look at it, I want you guys to do that. Actually, you can pause the video if you want to, and everybody look at it for a minute. The little protrusion on the atlas, on the axis, looks like a tooth. Okay? So that's one that you need to know. You need to know both dens and odontoid process. Okay. Oops. This is just showing you the different shapes of the different vertebrae. Again, I'm not going to ask you to tell which type of vertebrae is what on the test. I'm just going to ask you about the spinous process, vertebral foramen, and the transverse process. Okay. There's a thoracic one, looks a little bit different. Notice on these thoracic ones, the spinous process actually kind of points downwards. Just don't let that get confusing for you. And there's a lumbar. Okay, sacrum again is actually a fusion of other vertebrae, but it's all turned into one. And then coccyx is also a fusion of some, and it's tailbone. Okay, so the bony thorax, we're almost done. Okay, this is basically your rib cage. So protects your organs. Okay, protects your organs, and so really important. We've got three major parts. You have your sternum, which is just your breastbone. Okay, everybody can find that. Okay, your ribs, and then your thoracic vertebrae. Now, we've already talked about thoracic vertebrae, so we don't have that. Now, look at the picture. Okay, so we've got your clavicle, which is your collarbone, actually is not considered part of the bony thorax. So we'll learn that whenever we get to the appendicular skeleton. Okay, so let's look at the sternum first. So the sternum has three parts that are joined. We have the manubrium, okay, which is the very top part. It's kind of shaped like a shield or something. Then we have the body, which is just the middle section of the sternum. Then we have the xiphoid process, which is like the really sharp looking pointy portion of the lower end of the sternum. So you need to know all three of those and the sternum. Okay, now when we look at the ribs, we've got a couple different things. One, this white that's on here, that's called the costal cartilage, okay, which means rib cartilage. And that's what makes our rib cage, that's one thing that makes it really flexible. Okay, so that's all cartilage that where it actually connects to the sternum. And you can see it on the big skeleton too. So costal cartilage, that's something that you guys need to know. And then your ribs. You've got true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. So your true ribs are actually ribs 1 through 7. If you look at the big skeleton, you can count them. They actually connect themselves to the sternum. Okay? The false ribs, 8 through 12, actually connect to the ribs above them and then eventually connect back to the sternum. Okay, and then you've got the floating ribs, which are the ones that aren't connected at all in the front. And you can usually, you might can feel your floating ribs back there. So that's it. That's what you guys need to know. They're circled in your PowerPoint, so you need to make sure that you study those, you know those for the quiz. Again, you will have a word bank, but you know it's not an easy quiz to take. So make sure you look that up. Alrighty.